Good morning, Senators. The Committee in the Whole is now back, called to session. It's 9:50 a.m. The Speaker, Chair of Appropriations, had requested that if in fact there's any revenue enhancement initiatives that you would like to present to the committee for possible inclusion in the budget that you presented this morning. So I will recognize Speaker Cruz initially, and then if anyone else would like to speak on any other initiatives, then please notify the Chair. Speaker Cruz, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, preliminarily, I just want to call to everybody's attention that when we broke last night, I instructed OFB to do a study of the proposed revenue enhancement bills, and about last night at about 11:30, I WhatsApped it to all of you on the WhatsApp chat. And if you weren't able to read it in that tiny format, it's printed and it is on your desk. And so I just want to thank OFB for having stayed through the evening yesterday to prepare that report. Mr. Chairman, yesterday when we broke, we had deleted the real property tax amendment that I had included in Bill 323. That would mean that we are about $23 million short in order to be able to balance this budget. I know that yesterday there was some discussion that if there is a proposal to strike something, you should also have the concomitant provisions to make up for that that strike. Unfortunately, I did not include it and we did not include it in the rules, and that would be later in the bill. But in an attempt to try to balance the current budget that I've placed before all of you in 323, I'm going to try to make a few amendments this morning to try to make up for that lost $23 million. And I want to remind all the colleagues that this budget passed all of this revenue. Each of the appropriations to the departments is absolutely bare bones. My instruction to OFB in building the budget was to go in, look at what was given to us in January as the budget digest, and cover warm bodies, and then absolute essentials after that. Contracts that are continuing that are necessary. So it's absolutely bare bones. If we're unable to make up the 23, we as a body are going to have to figure out where to cut that 23 in the departments and agencies that follow. So I just, at this point, and as I'd asked all of you last night to think about some revenue enhancements, and that's why the report was prepared. That's preliminary. I have presented before all of you a proposed amendment to increase the hotel occupancy tax from 11 to 15%. As you can see from the report, that the hotel occupancy tax, if we were to take it to 15, would be able to generate about $16.27 million. Just so that everybody, so that it's clear, I'm also, if this 15 fails, then I'll just be honest. I'm going to try to see if we can get the 13 that they have in Northern Marianas. So I'll make those two. I'm not going to make the 12 and the 14. But those are the amounts that OFB has determined we could possibly generate if we were to raise it to 15. This was heard. I know there was some pushback on it, but it is the amount that is currently in CNMI, 15%. And so it is my desire at this time to ask my colleagues for their support in reinstating about $16 million to the revenue enhancements to the bill by supporting this increase in the hotel occupancy tax from 11 to 15. I'll stop at that. I won't belabor it since.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There's a motion or amendment on the floor to adjust the hotel occupancy tax from 11% to 15%. Mr. Speaker, in terms of presentation, this would be a sub-item within the existing Section 2?
Correct, and legal is aware of that it's within the subsection 2.
Okay.
So Section 2.
It will be inserted into Section 2 as a sub-item on the proposed amendment. Any discussions? Senator Rodriguez, Senator Lee. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
Hafide, good morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, again, first I want to thank the speaker, the good speaker, OFB, for putting together the budget that we have in front of us, and also for the report on the revenue enhancements, on the options we have before us. And, you know, just as we did yesterday, Mr. Chairman, in discussing the BPT increase, and for us here attempting to revert back to the 4%, and of course that failed. We've all talked about the other options we have in front of us, and the speaker is right. This is one option. And, however, Mr. Chair, this is one of those options that you know, it's easy. It's easy for those in the community to say, this is an option we should take because it doesn't directly impact our own people. This will be passed on to our visitors, those that that stay in the hotels, those of us also that have staycations and will be subject to this increase. You know, but it'll be very limited. It's not like the BPT where it's across the board, where it touches our people. It's not like any other tax increase that really is directed directly to our own people. Tourism, as I've learned it and understood it, at least this past term, Mr. Chairman, as the Committee on Tourism Chairman, I've seen firsthand the vulnerability of this industry. We've depended on tourism for many, many years, for decades. This has been one of the very powerful legs of our economy, and so it's easy to look at the numbers that the government, GVB in particular, puts out there and talks about record number of visitors coming to our island. However, Mr. Chairman, if you speak to the people on the ground, small business owners who are directly involved in tourism, that's not the picture they see. And I can speak a little bit about that personally as a former small business owner who cater directly to our tourism market, where more visitors to Guam does not translate into more spending by these visitors. Really, you got to look at the different profiles of the visitors that do come to island, and from there you can really see what type of impact they're having. If you're talking about the airlines and those taxes like this, because these people have to stay in hotels, then yeah, you'll see some of that. However, you talk to the business owners and even the hoteliers, Mr. Chairman. If you compare the room rate of what it was in the past and what it is today, You compare the cost of operations of that same room in the past and what it is today, things have changed. What has also changed, Mr. Chair, is the habits of traveling tourists. In the past, Guam has been very attractive because of our sand, our beaches, our people, and things we have to offer here. And yes, we still have those. However, we have now a lot of competition out there within the Asian region. And so what I've understood is that although we do still have those attractions we have here, there are a lot of things that we must do in order to compete with these other destinations. One is what we have to offer here in terms of our attractions, but the other also is price point. And we know that having very limited airline carriers on Guam makes it very difficult for us to compete in airfare. And so a lot of times our travel from Japan, for example, to Guam could be more expensive than travel from Japan to Hawaii. I've heard of rates where, gosh, I wish we get those same rates, $500–600 round trip from a city in Japan to Hawaii. We can't even get that here from Guam to Hawaii. And so when you take a look at that landscape, Mr. Chair, and you take a look at the competition that Guam is up against, putting on an additional burden on those same people that we're trying to bring to Guam, it's just not going to work. If we're still banking on tourism to be one of those most powerful legs in our economic stool, we shouldn't put any of these type of impediments before these efforts that we have. And I strongly feel that increase of 11 to 15 or even a 1% increase is going to make a big difference. We've heard in the public hearing how these tour operators, these hotels have pre-sold packages to Guam. And so not just is it a logistical challenge, but the overall impression that we will have as a destination who has increased the cost of what it takes to come to Guam will be very challenging. I'm not saying we should never adjust this. I just think that the time right now is not the time. I think down the road, one day, where we may have an integrated resort zone on Guam where we have another type of pleasure island, something that brings our level of attraction up a notch, then we can start talking about adjusting these types of fees. When that day comes, when that one day comes, when we're able to properly get our lighting system down in Tumon, our attractions in Umadak, around the island where our tourists feel safe to go, because at night they'll have lights. In the daytime, there's no trash. It's upkept. When this government is able to provide that type of service to our tourists and most especially to our people, then maybe it'll be the right time for us to revisit and look at increasing this type of fees. But we all know, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Mr. Chair. This is not the right time. When our government, when we are doing it to our own people, threatening our own people that we're going to cut down police services, fire services, it just doesn't send the right message. And so I rise to object to this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Rodriguez. Senator Lee, on the proposed amendment. Just for the information of the public who may be watching session, this particular option was presented to the senators in a revenue enhancement document by the Speaker, Chair of Appropriations, and it reflects option 4 to increase the hotel occupancy taxes from 11 to 15% with a projected increase in revenues of approximately $16.27 million. So just for the information of our people out there. Senator Lee, on the proposed amendment.
Sudusmasi, Mr. Chair, and I also want to take an opportunity to thank Speaker Cruz and really the hard work of the Office of Finance and Budget. I know that they've poured many hours and days and weeks into preparing these different options for us to weigh. And so I really appreciate that, and I also appreciate the hard work of my colleagues to continue to work on addressing these issues. I do want to take an opportunity and acknowledge that I believe that this financial shortfall, this crisis that we're in, it's real. And I acknowledge that we're upwards of $100 million in a shortfall. And I think that there's more than enough blame to go around. You know, the tourism industry has taken a hit with the threats from North Korea earlier this year, last year. We also have had the very negative impacts of the Trump tax cuts come down on us. But we also need to take responsibility for the position that we're in as a government. We have not done a very good job of setting ourselves up for success. Because whether it's the Trump tax cuts or it's North Korea or any other threat that might come to our island, we need to prepare ourselves. Actually, GVB has a rainy day fund for some of the things that they might need coming down the line, things that they might not be able to anticipate. So yeah, we didn't anticipate necessarily the breadth and how quickly these Trump tax cuts would affect our government, but we also didn't really prepare. We didn't do a good job of, when things were good, setting money aside and doing the diligent, fiscally responsible things to set ourselves up for success when push comes to shove. And now that we're in this cash crunch, we could really use some of that. So I do want to acknowledge that. I also spent a lot of time at the hearing when we were reviewing this measure to increase the hotel occupancy tax, and some of the feedback that we received from some of our industry stakeholders, from GVB, from GHRA, and some of the small business and private industry folks, was that they understand the needs of our government and the fact that, you know, we're in this fiscal crisis, but they were asking, why is it, and maybe this is a question I can pose to the author of this amendment, why is it that we always go to our so-called golden goose, to the tourism industry, whenever we're in a rut, and we ask for them to help us bail us out? I understand that right now, just geopolitically and with some of the issues that are going on in our region, our tourism industry is very fragile. So I'm somewhat concerned with this proposal, but I guess this increase from 11% to 15% would yield the government about $16.27 million. And my question would be, where would this money go? And how much of this money, the $16 million, would be directed back into strengthening our tourism industry, directed back into strengthening our destination and really helping to manage that? And so that's the question that I have to the mover of this amendment is, if the body agrees to increase from 11 to 15% and we have this $16 million, where is he anticipating that this money would go?
Thank you, Senator Lee. Speaker Cruz, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would, and I thank the good senator for the question. The hotel occupancy tax, and what we now refer to it as the TAF, the Tourist Attraction Fund, is not just for the hotels. It may be from the hotels, but it is not just for the hotels. In today's newspaper, we saw an article that GVB just received an award in Beijing for being one of the top 5 safest places for women to travel. That just doesn't happen because we put lights up. It's because we put money into the Tumon substation. We put money into other places that maybe we might light the southern tourist attraction spots that are coming. But without the money, we aren't able to do that. If we're not able to provide for GPD and for parks, for their maintenance people, and for their for the guards that they have, the police, we wouldn't have that distinction of being in the top 5 in the world with Portugal and Sri Lanka. So we need to be able to fund other parts of the government, not just Tumon and the tourist spots, but actually provide for safety. And the amounts that are needed for public safety are huge. It is a very high priority for not only the tourists, but even for our own local citizenry. Because if we can't get there, and the earlier question of why always seems to go to the golden goose, the golden egg, the weighted room rate in the last 6 years has gone from 140 to 207. This is only going to go up about $7 or $8 each. They had no problems raising the rates from 140 to 207, but all of a sudden are screaming because we want to be able to provide for better police protection. If we don't help provide for some assistance even at customs and quarantine, with other ways of making sure that this doesn't become the drug capital, or all the problems that are attendant to drug addiction, it's not going to continue to be a safe place. That's the reason, and that's why the money, though it's dubbed Tourist Attraction Fund, it's to make Guam an attractive place to be by also being safe. And so most of this money can go to the police department, and that then would be, we could move money out of there to fund other parts of the operation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Speaker Cruz. Senator San Nicolas, anyone else would like to speak on the proposed amendment? If not, Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have mixed feelings about this amendment, due in part to what was just mentioned by the retiring speaker. But I did definitely want to take this opportunity to put some facts on the table with respect to the industry. This is the only industry that has a special tax levied on the services it provides, which in turn 100% of which goes to its own special agency for the purposes of tracking its own market and spending all of that money to market itself. It's like having a special tax for a restaurant, and that restaurant is able to use that money to market itself. Almost the entirety of the Guam Visitors Bureau budget goes to marketing the tourism industry, which goes to bringing more customers in for these very same businesses that pay this tax. We talk about the importance of our tourism industry and how vital it is to our economy, and I don't think anybody will dispute that. But I think what needs to be made plain is the fact that this hotel industry is putting inordinate amounts of burdens on our people and this government in ways that are not commonly talked about. Madam Chair, if you pull up the most recent labor statistics report that we have, the most recent figures we have are from 2017, the Department of Labor Current Employment Report. In the private sector under services, and bear in mind, Madam Chair, we are a service-oriented economy. The bulk of our economic activity is in the service industry. Under services, we have 18,100 employees as of December 2017, the most recent available statistics. Of these 8,100 employees, 6,730 work in hotel and other lodging places. 6,000 of our people, 6,000 of our households, 6,000 of our school children are fed through this hotel industry. This industry that is so vital to our community pays, at least in strictly the hotels, $9.49 an hour on average of the 6,730 employees. Let's pause for a minute and reflect on that, Madam Chair. If 6,700 employees are making $9.49 an hour, and our minimum wage is just a fraction below that, that means that a huge chunk of our hotel workers are getting paid minimum wage, with a few of them getting paid a little bit more to kind of bump the average up. The hotel and lodging industry is the lowest paying industry on our island. This industry that is so vital to the survival of our community is paying the people who work there, 6,000 of our people, the lowest in the entire private sector. By comparison, Madam Chair, all other services outside of hotels, the average hourly earnings, all other services, is $16. So if you work in a restaurant, if you work in, a tour company, you're getting paid on average $16, but every single one of our 6,000 workers are only getting paid $9.49. Now, what does that mean in terms of the inordinate burdens I'm talking about that puts on our community? Madam Chair, that makes up our EITC workforce. If you're making minimum wage of $9.49 an hour, I'll bet my bottom dollar that you're among the many of our EITC workforce that our government needs to subsidize with an EITC payout. The people of Guam, the taxpayers, are subsidizing the employment costs of the hotel industry. Because apparently, they're not making enough to pay their workers more than $9.49 an hour, but a restaurant and another tourism-related service industry outside of the lodging industry is somehow able to pay their people more. As was mentioned by the retiring speaker, the room rate went from $140 to $207 over the last 6 years. Madam Chair, that's a 47% increase in the room rate. How much of that went to the workers? And I hammer this point, Madam Chair, because a majority of these hotel and lodging industries are foreign-owned corporations. And as much as I'm Mr. Pro-Development in here, Madam Chair, I tussle with some of my fellow members because I'm very pro-development. But development needs to be responsible in creating opportunities for our people that they're able to actually live here. And when our foreign corporations are coming in here and doing this to our people, paying them these wages, putting these EITC burdens on our community, I am not as empathetic. These are the kind of things, these are the unspoken realities in our community that keep me up at night. These are the kind of conversations we need to be having so our people become aware that as much as we want to support growth and development and tourism, etc., the companies have a responsibility to give back. And if a majority of these hotels and lodging industries are foreign-owned, they're not giving back, they're exporting the profits home to whatever foreign country owns their corporation. Now, I want to invite as many foreign investment as possible, but if that's what's happening here, it's no wonder our people continue to struggle. And so one of the realities we need to factor into all of this, Madam Chair, is that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that reduced the corporate income tax rate, for these very same foreign corporations. So their profits went up. They've been up since the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has been effective. I personally have not heard of any pay raises at the hotels. One of the bills I introduced several years ago, Madam Chair, was to mandate that hotels provide health insurance for every single employee, regardless if you're full-time, regardless if you're part-time, make it be an industry standard. And the reason why I introduced that, Madam Chair, was because if you're making $9.49 an hour and you don't have health insurance and your kid gets sick, you're one of the people that has to take them up to GMH or public health. And again, the taxpayer has to subsidize the health care of the worker. While room rates are going from $140 to $207, and tourism is booming, and you know, this is the kind of thing that upsets me every time I see these headlines. Record June, we had a record June. I've been seeing that for the last several years now, record this and record that. When is it going to get to the people of Guam? And so when the industry comes in and they testify against proposals like these, and they talk about how we're competing with lower cost destinations, the first thing that flashes in my mind is, I don't want our people to be living that kind of lifestyle. The people who work in our hotels should not be living the lifestyle of third world countries that we're supposed to be competing with. So the reason why I have mixed emotions about this amendment is because while everything I said lends to the argument that raising the tax shouldn't be something that we object to, I would prefer that we pursue policy objectives that are going to be a win-win, almost like a double-barreled shotgun, so to speak, where if we were to mandate health insurance coverage in our hotels, not only would we improve the quality of life of the worker, but we would also reduce the subsidy necessary for GMH. And we would reduce the number of our people who are dependent on Medicaid, because they would be insured. And in passing something like that instead, while it would be a cost burden to the hotel, a direct tax, raising the hotel occupancy tax, would also be a direct cost. But then it would go to subsidize the government, which in turn is going to subsidize the very same worker by having to have these tax increases to partially go to eventually the same pot that EITC would have paid out, or to the same pot that a subsidy to GMH would have come from. But the greater conversation in all of this, Madam Chair, is that we have these gross imbalances in responsibilities to the people of Guam. And I wanted to put it on the record that while I may not necessarily support this tax increase because I think that we should be instead mandating more health insurance for the workers, my lack of support for this tax increase is not an endorsement of the business practices of our hotels, who pay our employees $9.49 an hour, don't properly insure them, and are burdening 6,730 families. While their room rates go up 47%. We work so hard in here, we're working so hard with this budget to try and make things work and make things fit. But everybody has to do their part, including our private sector, including this very important industry that to this very day, with all of these record arrivals, has done nothing to improve the quality of life of the 6,730 workers in their establishments.
Senator Nicholas. Thank you. Senator Ogun, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker and Chair. You know, I'm listening very intently to some of the comments that are being presented. One, we heard from the Chair of Tourism highlighting that at this time it would not be appropriate to increase hotel occupancy taxes. We also heard about some of the information that was just disseminated in regards to the compensation of many of our people in the tourism industry. But you know, Madam Speaker, one thing that certainly concerns me is we had a public hearing where a number of individuals and also business owners came in and provided testimony. And they shared with us that the proposal that was being considered at this time should not be considered because of the sensitive nature of the tourism industry. We saw exactly what transpired when, in fact, the North Korea threat was directly impacting our tourism industry. That's how sensitive this industry is, which is our #1 industry on Guam. And we have to be mindful of how we impact them in terms of taking more resources out of the businesses. But another perspective, Madam Speaker, is looking at this whole discussion about looking for revenue enhancements. It really comes down to why are we looking at revenue enhancements rather than looking at ways to streamline this government and to remove duplicative services and functions. In 6.5 months, Madam Speaker, that's based on the budget, the passage of Public Law 34, that's 87. This government made a commitment that in 6.5 months it would reduce the expenditures of this government by approximately $30 million. And that commitment was reiterated last week during the course of one of the public hearings. In 6.5 months, by belt tightening, and I haven't seen any consolidation or any public-private partnerships being pursued, so by belt tightening, this government was able to reduce the cost by $30 million. Now we're looking at moving to fiscal year 19 and reducing the expenses of this government by $27 million based on the original presentation of Bill 323, the original revenue estimates. $27 million. On the one hand, we're asking the people of Guam, through the increase in Section 2 of the business privilege tax, to forego up to $62 million a year in the entire next fiscal year. But yet, the government of Guam is going to reduce its expenditures by $27 million. Well, guess what, Madam Speaker? That $27 million, because of the action of the majority of this body, automatically increased to $50 million. That this government has got to reduce its costs, reduce expenditures of this government. And there are tools that are already in place, such as the provision for the reorganization and streamlining in Public Law 34-87. The question is, do some of the individuals really want to streamline this government of Guam? Individuals who otherwise could make those decisions today in this administration. And the answer is no, because I haven't seen it. Well, Madam Speaker, I brought that up because Section 2 in its present form, aside from this proposed amendment, would require again for the taxpayers to remit $62 million to this government to sustain its operations, while the budget proposes to reduce the expenditures of the government by $27 million. Now, $50 million if this amendment doesn't pass. Then that would be a commitment, Madam Speaker. Why are we reflecting on revenue enhancements? Rather than looking at streamlining and reducing the expenditures of this government. That's my concern. The first option is when a revenue proposal is extracted from this budget, we look at other ways to generate revenues, rather than looking at ways to reduce the expenditures of this government. That was the first consideration. Maybe it's because of the placement of Section 2, but regardless, we should be concentrating on efficiencies. We should be concentrating on removing duplicated functions and services. We should be concentrating on responding to the people of Guam that, yes, there are insufficient revenues to carry this government in its present structure, and we need to do our homework and streamline this government and realize some reduction in expenditures. So why don't we just move forward with this budget and find where that $50 million cost reduction will come in? Yes, I agree, it's going to be tough because some firm decisions have to be made about prioritizing the areas of education, public safety, and healthcare. But we can start by following the mandate of what this body passed in 3487, which says specifically that the priority of this government is to provide education services, is to provide healthcare services, and is also to provide public safety. That's what that law says, and that's what was passed by this body. So we really should follow the letter of that law and look at what we possibly can do, or what we can do, or what we need to do to be able to reduce the expenditures of this government. And you know, the reason why I also bring this up, Madam Speaker, is because I really don't trust this administration. Give them more money, and we don't even know where the cost reduction for the $30 million is originating from, is coming from. I don't know, and I've been looking for documents in terms of where those cost reduction, because the last fiscal realignment plan that was presented, that I was privy to have a copy of, says that Guam DOE was going to assume a $17 million reduction. And the superintendent stepped in and said, without touching the educational environment and the instruction of our kids, DOE can only absorb a $12 million reduction. That's what I'm aware of in terms of the fiscal realignment plan. Where the reduction in $30 million is, I have no idea. And if there's someone in this hall that knows exactly where some of these cost reductions are being applied, then I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to know how this government is going to continue to recognize that reduction in expenditures of this government, and then look at reducing the overall expenses accordingly going to fiscal year 2019. But it comes down, Madam Speaker, to Madam Chair, to not trusting giving this administration more money so that they can enter into whatever, more contracts, so that they can commit this government to an additional $10 to $15 million of personnel annualized expense, of which not even 20% of all those positions fall into the priorities of education, public safety, and healthcare. That's the concern that I have, Madam Speaker, is giving this administration more money, knowing full well that they rated that 911 funds, the E911 funds of approximately $4 million, knowing full well that they raided the Chamorro Land Trust Commission Fund, knowing full well that in 2016 they raided the Child Support Fund to keep this government operating. And it comes down to basic business finance, and that is being able to operate on a break-even basis. And I'm not about ready to give this administration additional access to additional resources when in fact we should be looking and focusing on reducing the expenses and the expenditures of this government. Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ogun. On the amendment, if there's no one else on the amendment, Senator Nelson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is no secret that that the $100 million plus shortfall is real. And it is very clear, as some of my colleagues have stated, that there's a lack of trust in the government. There's a lack of trust that the legislature will appropriate this money, and where will the administration put it? We did the fiscal realignment plan, and then we had the director of BBMR, Mr. Carlson, come down and say, oh, it's an honest aid system, and we're not guaranteeing the implementation. We're relying that these agencies would have cut. And what makes it the most curious is that the tax amnesty brought in the amount of money that the government needed at this time to survive. This tax amnesty was not supposed to be used to go to hire more personnel. It was not supposed to be used to increase government expenses. The intent of the tax amnesty was to help the government operate and save in the future years. So now my colleagues are saying there's a lack of trust. And I agree with them. But the challenge that is set before us is to find the solutions. And I'm glad that the good senator from Jonya spoke on realigning the government of Guam, finding how we can increase efficiencies within the government of Guam. And so, Madam Speaker, I have looked within my agencies, and according to the OPA audit report in 2011, mind you, this was before we were in this legislature, there was this thing called in Guam Fire Department that the audit report stated called non-productive pay. This non-productive pay would save the government $1.6 million back in 2011. Which means because of the continued hiring and promotions, this non-productive pay will now save the government more than $1.6 million. And so, Madam Speaker, I hope that I have the good senator from Jonya's support when we produce a way to increase efficiencies in the government. And I'd also like to thank the good senator from Dededo laying out the facts and realities that the people in the hotel industry have to endure. Because it is no secret that we have foreign investors. And it is very clear that a majority of the profit leaves this island with these foreign investors. This is what happens. It's like when you go into a swimming pool, no? And everyone that comes out of the swimming pool takes a little bit of that water from that swimming pool. And before you know it, if you continue this practice, the swimming pool will be half empty and you can no longer swim in the pool. In the most simplest terms, this is what's happening in our economy. And the most dangerous thing about this amendment that the Speaker provides is, for me, is not because of the numbers not adding up. Is not because of the unfairness that is given the workers in the hotel industry, and we're worried that they might lose their jobs because of the TCJA, they got a 40% discount. They increased the room rates, and they haven't even done anything to provide health care for these workers or increase their pay. The most dangerous thing about this amendment is if I vote for this amendment, what will the businesses do? How will this impact the election? And this is what I believe. I'm not speaking for anyone else. But Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, there are things that we need to consider, and sometimes being a leader that the community elects us to is to make the hard choices. And before I look to support any raise in real property tax, to support any raise in BPT to hurt the people of Guam, the working families, even more, I would seriously consider certain streams of revenue that demands responsibility for those that employ the people of Guam. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. On the Speaker Cruz amendment, if there's no one else, Senator Espadon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Interesting conversation. And of course, this is all in an effort to try to figure out how we can balance the budget. I do want to take note that the chairman of Appropriations and the mover of this amendment did make the remark, and it's true, right, that after all the public hearings on what the various agencies need to operate at a bare minimum, this budget reflects that number. Through an increase, or at least the maintaining of the BPT at 5%, that in itself raises about $60 million. The federal tax that was recently passed and that affects us negatively is anticipated to really reduce the revenues to this government by about $150 million. What this measure does at this point is not to try to recover the whole $150 million that we've lost in revenue because of the Job Cut Tax Act, whatever they call it, right, from the federal government. All this budget is looking for is not to raise the 150, but to really raise $90 million. And as the good speaker and chairman of Appropriations said, that's to basically allow the government to operate on a bare bones budget. So instead of trying to raise $150 million through revenue enhancements, he's trying to figure out how do we sustain this government at a very minimum bare bones budget. And that is to basically try to raise $90 million out of the $150 million that we lost. The proposal before us right now, let me just add on to that last statement. So in essence, what we're trying to do now is take a look at fiscal year 2019 and and basically cut $60 million from the government's budget. Fair enough, right? So, even though there was a previous speaker that says, well, through the previous 6 months, we've been able to reduce by $30 million, and all this is adding is another $27 million, whatever it may be. Bottom line is, in total, this budget proposes to reduce the budget, the 2018 budget, by $60 million. So there will be some realignment that needs to happen. There will be some reductions and efficiencies that need to be realized. But in the meantime, we still need to make up the budget to at least a very bare bones budget, which is, again, to make up $90 million of the $150 million that we lost. Relative to the amendment before us, this basically puts, it basically proposes to raise the hotel occupancy tax from 11% to 15%. In prior years, several years back, the hotel occupancy tax was at 13%. 13%. And due to, I believe it was a natural disaster or a series of natural disasters in which tourism dropped, in an effort to help the tourism industry, this body lowered the hotel occupancy tax to perhaps make it more attractive, to entice more visitors to come back to Guam, especially during those times. It might be time to bring it back up to 13%. Maybe not 15, because again, we all understand, and it's been spoken to, the fragile nature of tourism. Not just here on Guam, but in any destination. It's very fragile. Anything could happen. We've seen it in other areas where if there was an infrastructure problem or if there was a natural disaster or calamity, tourism stops. We've seen it here on Guam as well. Whether it was, again, SARS, you know, an epidemic of some sort, whether it was a threat from North Korea, whatever. But there is a fragility to the industry. But the reality is, prior to being 11%, it was 13%. And it was lowered because the tax was lowered to help the tourism industry recover at that time. I would like to make a motion to change the 15% to 13% and bring it back to where it was. And that's my motion at this time, and we'll discuss it further after this. If I may also, just at the very tail end before I formally, I guess that's the motion on the floor, but if I may, I had talked to several companies or owners of businesses who are in the tourism industry. Naturally, they can't come out and say sometimes things that are contrary to what Guam Visitors Bureau or the board says. So they choose not to speak, period. But in private, their sentiments to me are that if we raise it, even to 15%, the tourists will still come. They know, tourists know, especially tourists from Asia, know that that's a natural part of doing business because they do it in their own countries as well. But they can't come out and say that publicly at a public hearing, especially when the very board that governs the industry, the Guam Visitors Bureau, is there making their presentations against any kind of increase in taxes to them. The author and mover of this amendment is correct. A lot of the funds, I mean, out of the $44 million that the Tourist Attraction Fund is going to raise from hotel occupancy taxes, roughly about half of it, maybe a little bit more than half, will go to GVB, Guam Visitors Bureau, for its efforts in continuing to market this island. The other half goes to other areas in this island because tourism isn't isolated just to Tumon. Tourism, really, they come here to experience the whole island. And so, yes, the speaker is correct, right? Public safety is important. Make sure that we maintain that designation and that recognition that we're a safe destination. Right? Maintenance of our highways so that the product itself, which is the island, is visually attractive. And there are many other areas. And then there must also be a benefit to the people of this island who host the tourists. Right? Whether directly or indirectly, there has to be a benefit to the local people. I have no problem with raising the tax at hotel occupancy for the tourist attraction fund through the hotel occupancy tax, but I don't believe it should be up to 15%. I believe we should bring it back to where it was several years ago and reinstate it back to the 13% before we lowered it to 11%. So my motion on the floor right now, Madam Chair, is to change that figure from 15% to 13%. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Espadon. We're going to take a 1-minute recess. All right, we're now on the Espaldon amendment to Speaker Cruz's amendment. So the Espaldon amendment is to change 15 to 13. Oh, Speaker Cruz?
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the mover of the amendment for his amendment. It was my intention that if the 15 failed, I was going to try 13. And I appreciate and I join in his comments and insights about the need for this. Rather than belabor the point, I'll just say I support this amendment to 13.
On the Espaldon amendment? Is there anyone else who would like to speak? If not, well, Senator Muña.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Prior to the amendment being proffered, I had considered lowering the percentage rate only because I appreciate all of the colleagues' comments. I understand that it is a sensitive industry. I also understand that the industry is booming, and maybe we should consider that. I see a lot of the employees in the hotel industry struggling, 2-3 jobs, and they have to have 2 to 3 jobs just to make it in what they're being compensated for in that industry. So I do understand that there is a sensitivity, though, involved in raising the taxes to 15%, which is one of the reasons why I do support the amendment to bring it to 13%. At one point, I was even considering the 12% would be still palatable, I think, for the industry to accept a slight increase. And then we have so many different options that the OFB prepared for us. So option 2, which is the raising it up to 13%, would only bring us up $8 million. But if we do consider some of the other options, then we can achieve the $23 million that we're short. So I do support the amendment up to 13%. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rodriguez?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The same sentiments and position I had earlier on the increase from 11 to 15 stands. And so I would, of course, object to this amendment. And really, I think what we need to do, Madam Chair, is look at how we're going to adjust our expenditures on the 23 million. I mean, it's easy. If we pass this, that's 8 million of the 23 that we're gonna offset, or if it's the 15, it's 16 million. Make it easier for us, right? To either find the additional to make up the 23, or harder for us to look at this budget and look at where we need to cut expenditures. I'm ready to do that, to make those hard decisions. The wisdom that our leaders before us had years ago, when the hotel occupancy was at 13, I believe, what was mentioned, and it was reduced to 11. We have to put some weight into the wisdom that they were thinking at that time. Perhaps there was a natural disaster. I'm not sure what exactly triggered that reduction, but the tourism industry is in nowhere better shape. It may not be as bad as it was during that point in time, but it's not. It's very vulnerable, and I think a lot of us recognize that. And so I just find it very hard for us to do something like this when we know as a government there's other things we could do, the hard decisions on where we're going to make the reductions in expenditures, or if it's looking at other industries that have been given special tax holidays over the years. If we're going to look at plugging up that 23 million, I would ask my colleagues to please consider looking at those options instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the Espaldon amendment? All right. If there's no other speaker on the Espaldon amendment, we're going to vote, but I'm going to wait for everyone to get back in the room. We'll just take another 31-minute recess, if you don't mind. Could we please call the senators? Senator Morrison, on the amendment?
Madam Chair, I just wanted to find out the rules apply. I mean, the previous speaker did state that he's willing to make the hard decisions, make the cuts necessary as we go through the budget process. These options presented by OFB, should those measures, or we don't fulfill those cuts necessary through the budget, is there options to come back to these proposals? As it seems like the statements that are being made is assuming that we have a plan already ahead of us, that they know where they're going to cut. And if those don't carry the necessary votes, we're having a challenge getting any amendment through. But if those cuts don't get the required votes to pass, I'm wondering how these options could still be entertained. So I'm basically suggesting that these options should be still have the ability to come back to. I just feel we're in a phase where we're making assumptions ahead of ourselves, and that there's cuts that will be, that amount to the necessary 23 million, but I haven't seen that yet. So I'm not sure how to vote on any of these measures. But unless we should proceed with the budget, see where those cuts will be made, should we carry through in that, then we may not need to come back to these options. So maybe this should come after. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Morrison. Senator Torres.
The retiring speaker from Pneumatic is precisely right. One of the rules that we were reminded of when we started this deliberation was that if any revenue enhancement was going to be proposed, it had to have had a public hearing. And in this instance, the two proposals that have been brought before us, an increase in real property taxes, and which failed yesterday, and today an increase in hotel occupancy taxes, both options did have public hearings. Now, if we were to, if they are to fail, or if one is to pass, it still doesn't bring us to the threshold of 23 million, which is the amount represented by real property taxes, which would have balanced this budget and given us sufficient revenues. So to the retiring speaker's point, he is correct. All the options, of the 25 options, 12 included revenue generating measures. Of those 12, I believe only 2 were given, or not 2, but the hotel occupancy and the real property were the only 2 that were actually vetted through a public hearing process. And I don't believe we have the option in this budget cycle to include any other revenue, including, for example, an increase in limited gaming taxes or inclusion of wholesale business privilege taxes, or including banking activities in the business privilege tax. I don't believe any of those have had public hearings. If I'm, and I'll stand corrected if I'm wrong. But the one thing that I'm a little sensitive to is we're all very sensitive to what any tax increase has on the average citizen. And in the case of a hotel occupancy tax, the irony of all of this is that in the public hearing that we had for the 2 measures, the hotel occupancy tax was opposed by most people that I believe attended, whereas the real property tax was supported. And here we are entertaining it in the reverse, which I find quite ironic. But I just want to point out that I believe that the retiring speaker is correct, that if these fail, then we either go back to the business privilege tax as a way to balance the revenue stream needed to allow for all these allotments that are in here in the proposed Bill 323, or we go to what I had suggested and was hoping was the rules of engagement in this exercise, that if you were to cut a revenue stream, that you also had a corresponding cut to an allotment. Unfortunately, that wasn't one of the rules of engagement, but I believe we've now arrived at that point where if this second option is defeated and there's no other revenue stream that has gone through a public hearing process, and we're really at that point where we're just going to have to look for cuts after this motion is dispensed with. But I suppose I'm just talking out loud, but I'm just trying to come to an understanding about what our next move is going to be in this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Esteves, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, during the budget cycle, when we went through this last year, I think there was a practice and it's been common. First, we have to adopt the revenues, and we haven't gotten to that point yet as we're trying to make the determination of where those revenues are going to be derived from. But it seems like we've completely did a 180 on how we look at the budget. What we're looking at is how much money do we need to raise to get to a certain point, as opposed to how much money we have, for example, in revenues, and then what we're prioritizing as a legislature based on that available funding. And it's like we've completely switched whether we're going with the chicken or we're going with the egg. But if we were to approach this from a budgetary standpoint, we have to look at what revenues are available. So whether there's a reduction in perceived revenues, as at this point, I think is inconsequential, because we haven't even adopted the revenues as a body. So every appropriation coming afterwards also has not been adopted by this body. So as of right now, as far as I'm concerned, going through the budget process, we're at zero. And the only amount that we've gotten to is the money derived from the business privilege tax, which is in law, if this budget were to pass, because it was maintained by this body. So again, I think looking further ahead into the budget on how we have to make up, I think contradicts the entire idea of having a budget, working within the confines. Because if everybody had the ability to just make up more money to match expenses or match luxuries, then that's not a budget. It goes against the definition of a budget. The whole core of this, Madam Speaker, is to set priorities and stay within our means. That should be the foundation, and that should be the basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the Espadon amendment to Speaker Cruz's amendment, any other speakers? If not, then we'll vote on the Espadon amendment to the amendment. So it will be to change the word 15 in Speaker Cruz's floor amendment to 13.
Madam Chair,
yes.
If I may have a few words to close.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, please close.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody's concern. To the last speaker, I understand in terms of the budgetary process, but I think we also need to always just be very cognizant of the fact that these are different times. Again, because of the new federal tax law and because we mirror that, there has been a decrease of $150 million of revenues. And yes, we can cut and cut and cut. But we must also be cognizant of the fact that if we cut so much that it affects even our own government employees being furloughed, laid off, fired, whatever it may be, there is a ripple effect throughout the economy. Because even the GovGuam employees and the missions that they have are important to the everyday business that happens on this island. Whether it's a revenue tax, whether it's through Parks and Rec, whether it's through whatever agency, they all have a role, a very significant role. And yes, no doubt, there's probably some fat here and there or some padded budgets here and there. But as was reminded to us by the Chairman of Appropriations, this is a bare bones budget. He tried to trim it as much as possible, and in fact, he's looking at, if anything, a cut in the government of $60 million at this point. The ripple effect is real. If work week hours are shortened or services are shortened, there could be a drastic change in the way, or excuse me, in the amounts that we see in terms of the business privilege tax coming into the government, which could further decrease. We could see a change in even the individual taxes that have declined under the new tax law, but we could see a decline because if we keep going down this road of cut, 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 then really we could be setting ourselves up for a domino effect which would be very hard to recover from. Where to cut expenditures? Again, I think we need to remind ourselves also that once we take care of, with this budget, or any budget before us, even the last budget, once we take care of the priority areas of public safety, public health, and education, there's approximately 30% left in the kitty to cover everything else. So if it's true that we're going to try to prioritize those three agencies, or not even agencies, those three areas, because we have to remind ourselves also that when you start talking about public health and public safety, we're not just talking about the facility and the people in there, we're also talking about other services to include, say for example, customs and quarantine, who play a very critical role in making sure that our borders are secure enough that we don't have, first of all, invasive species that would harm the crops that we grow, or the importation of contraband, which hurt the people and increase the cost of social services. And all those areas that are kind of not considered public health, public safety, or education, those will have to be cut. And if we don't fund those, then we could see a degradation of our government services and the quality of life on this island. And that's why I think it's imperative that we find a way to at least finance this government at the very bare bones. Right now, we're $23 million short. At raising the hotel occupancy tax from 11% to back to where it was at 13%, that would generate another $8 million. We're still going to be short roughly $16 million, and perhaps we can find ways to either enhance revenues to make up that $16 million, or then cut from that point. But a reminder, after we service and after we fund the critical agencies, there's only 30 to 35% of the budget left to fund everybody else. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, point of information, please.
State your point of information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been mentioned more than once with regards to this budget proposes a $60 million reduction. And that's one of the reasons why yesterday I repeated my question twice. The Speaker, the Chair of Appropriation, acknowledged that this budget proposes, because it's not $30 million reduction from this fiscal year plus an additional $27 million reduction. The reduction should have been applicable this fiscal year and remained. So the figure that we should be discussing in terms of overall reduction in expenses of the government of Guam, that this proposal presented in its initial form, was $27 million. And that was reaffirmed by the Chair of Appropriations yesterday. So I need to ensure that whatever information we are providing the members of this community, that we recognize that $30 million was reduced in this fiscal year, and that the reduction is not going back to fiscal year 18's revenues and expenditures authorization, but it's looking at fiscal year 19 and the $27 million reduction in expenses that this budget in its initial form called for. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator. On the Espaldon amendment to...
Madam Chair, just a point of information.
Please state your point of information.
It was stated that customs and quarantine is seen as a secondary priority, but I just want to affirm for the record that when this body passed within the sales tax, which still exists, the government reorganization and what the priorities are, customs and quarantines is a priority one, group one under public safety. So it's right up there in the highest priorities. And again, for the record, customs and quarantine is and has been funded via special funds, only special funds paid for by the carriers and the passengers. It doesn't have an effect on the general fund.
Thank
so
you
I
for
just
your
want to
point of
clarify
information.
those points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. All right, on the Espaldon amendment to Speaker Cruz's amendment, all in favor, please raise your hand. All in favor of the Espaldon amendment, please raise your hand. I got 9. What? 5, 6, 7. I'm counting 9. Thank you very much. The amendment passes. All right, now we're on Speaker Cruz's amendment with 13. The amended amendment. Senator Espaldon, you still have the floor. Is there anything else or any other speaker? Any other speaker on Speaker Cruz's amendment? Senator? Wait. All right,
Thank you.
Senator Esteves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's been discussed that this budget is bare bones. I think a bunch of our colleagues have brought it up consistently, but I don't agree with that sentiment. And I'd like to refer to an article actually read recently, which I think is very relevant. And it was in and I don't often cite news articles, but this was from the USA Today, and it discusses a California DMV worker who slept thousands of hours on the job, and the state finds charges against. And what they were able to estimate that the employee slept over 2,200 hours of work and cost the government $40,000. If you read the article, right, that's the catching point. But when I read the article, Madam Chair, what I read was that based on state data, that people in that position, key data operators, are expected to process more than 550 documents and reports a day. And she averaged 200. And all I can think, while others might look at that and say, wow, she slept a lot, cost the government, I looked at the data. I'd be very surprised if there's an agency out there that can provide those kinds of metrics to validate their performance or validate efficiency. People don't realize that when we talk about bare bones budgeting, bare bones operation, the truth of the matter, it's so subjective. Director A comes and says, I need X amount for my employees, this is bare bones. Okay, you got it. There was a point in this government, a time when we actually did performance-based budgeting. And at some point that just disappeared. There's no data, absolutely no data to back up that the money we're appropriating these agencies, especially these secondary, tertiary, ancillary agencies that are not priority one, there's no data backing up their operations. There's no data truly backing up that the money the taxpayers invest into those agencies has a return, either in services. We can barely quantify or qualify anything our government does. And so this constant discussion on having to fund bare bones, I don't agree with the sentiment. What does bare bones mean? What do we get out of that? We don't know. Most of the directors don't know, and administrators. Maybe a handful that can tell you what your taxpayer dollar actually gets you. And we've seen this time and time again. And so again, with discussions on trying to generate revenue to meet the basic necessities of the government, I don't agree with that, because none of us really know what the basic necessities of the government is. If the executive branch doesn't know, we sure as heck don't know. And until we get to a point where we have to actually do the work and evaluate and actually apply data, objective data, metric data, quantifiable and qualifiable data, it's all for nothing. Because if you look at the budget, 323, with all the revenues that were projected with the tax increases, is just a status quo budget minus. That's it. And so with increases that are risky, that could have potential long-term effects to try to address a situation now, I don't think is warranted. I think it's a dangerous path to go down, because we don't know what the effects are. And we haven't even tried, Madam Chair, to look at and address and try to operate this budget as thinly as possible. Because I'll tell you right now, getting rid of a classified employee, especially one, a non-performer, or a position, and we all agree there's some fat that can be trimmed within the government, or a position that doesn't provide a benefit, which we wouldn't even know because we have no data to determine that, is near impossible. But to remove a furlough, to hire someone back, to stop a layoff before it happens, that can happen very quickly. And so, I want to reiterate, we're missing out on an opportunity for all of us to put in the hard work that's necessary to really figure out. Because, we throw around all these terms, but there really isn't any data to back up. There's no quantifiable data that I could see from, in large part, on the budget that can really justify. Just saying, my payroll is X amount, so that's what you have to fund me, it's not good enough anymore, Madam Chair. That's not good enough. When we were looking at this budget from a zero ZBB approach, I thought we were looking, and they were going to be coming and making the discussions, building their agencies from the ground up. But all they did was take what their minimum was, that imaginary line we always have to deal with, of the fixed liability of Government of Guam payroll and contributions and benefits. And as the government, our expenses stay here, and as government revenue goes up and down, we can't do anything. And we're stuck, just trying to keep our heads above water. And we've never taken a serious look to make the determination, what is bare bones? What can the community live without? Or what does the community actually want? And with this golden opportunity to go back and have a reason to reevaluate how we do things, we're just passing it up by trying to increase taxes. I wouldn't even be opposed to tax increases, Madam Chair, if we've done the necessary work. We've all done the necessary work to try to change the way we do things and to do it a little bit better. So I oppose the amendment. I oppose the increase. I think it's too dangerous. We don't know what the outcome could be. And trying to address something that might have a long-term impact, to try to address an issue going on right now, I think is a bit short-sighted. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Esteves. Senator Muña.
I have a question for the mover of the amendment. On Section 2X, item number 4, it states the rate for a registered bed and breakfast shall be 4% of the rental charge or paid per occupancy per day. My question is that amount that will be generated from that particular item included in the options, I guess option 2 now, is that included in the total amount?
Speaker, will you yield to the question?
Thank you very much for the question. Madam Chair, the way that the amendment was written was the way that we had it publicly heard. And the way that we had it publicly heard was after my initial proposal of an increase was sent to legal, and they sent it back to me and said that we had to move 2 to 3. In section 2, it had to have this date that it was going to end, and it was going to start up again after a certain date. And that's the way that legal provided it to me. But the 4% is what is currently there. There's no increase in the 4% for the bed and breakfast. It's just dealing with moving the 11% up. But it was the way that they sent it back to me for the hearing, and that was the way that it was heard. I had a problem trying to figure it out, but it's just moving section 2 to section 3, having the 3 in section 3, it go up to 11, and section 3 went to section 4. Subsection 4. That's just the way that it was. I spent 40 minutes between 11:30 and 12:15 last night texting, but that was the way that I was told. Legal had the hearing, and it was kicked back for that reason.
So the way I understand it then, it wasn't added, it was just included then?
It's in the existing statute.
Okay.
So he's continuing the existing statute.
Okay. I'm also wondering then, in that case, will the sunset, will that particular section also now be a part of the sunset?
This is new. The sunset is new. So
the way that it's written, the sunset's only on the increase.
On the increase, not what's already existing. Okay.
All right. If I may, the sunset language says the provisions adopted in Section 2 of this Act, Section 2 of the bill. So this whole thing would be removed at the end of the sunset. So it would revert to the original statute, which has
4%. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to understand. Thank you very much.
And 11% as the
Would it go back to 11% after October 1, 2019?
That's correct.
That's correct.
All right. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. So I'm just trying to understand the way it's written, what was already existing, and then what was included in here. So basically, what will happen is, as it is written now, 13% will go back down to 11% after October 1st, 2019. And then the 4% on the bed and breakfast will remain as is. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. On the Speaker Cruz amendment? Senator Ada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On that same subsection 4 there, as I read it, it gives the impression that the rate for registered bed and breakfast shall be 4%. And I guess if you're not a registered bed and breakfast, so you don't have to pay any. So in that same subparagraph 4, it reads that the rate for a registered bed and breakfast shall be 4%. And it seems to suggest then that if you're not a registered bed and breakfast, which we probably have a number of them out there, you don't have to pay this 4%. So I would like to make the amendment to just delete the word registered. So if you're operating as a bed and breakfast, it is hoped that you would already be registered, and you shouldn't be operating unless you've registered. So I would move that we delete that, strike that word registered, so that it's applicable to all bed and breakfast operations.
All right, on the amendment, Speaker Cruz.
That's the current language that there is, and I'm not sure if you're going to be able to get any bed and breakfast that isn't registered to pay any tax whatsoever. And I know that Madam Chair introduced legislation to try to get that addressed with quick. It's an issue with revenue and taxation of getting everybody in. But I have no I have no comment on whether or not it should be struck. I'm just saying it's current statute, and it's a problem that revenue and taxation has on registering them. And so I have no further.
On the amendment? If I may just add from here, Senator, I know that when we passed the bill regarding the short-term rentals, they are taxed at 11%, and they're, I'm assuming if you're not a registered bed and breakfast, you're going to be considered a short-term rental. So I'm not sure of removing that word. I don't know. On the amendment. Senator Augustine.
Madam Speaker, maybe you should take a short recess and take a look at that, because of the short-term rental being 11%. I can't understand why the bed and breakfast will be 4%. It should be 11. If you can just get clarification before we pursue any further.
All right, we'll take 1 minute recess. Legal's here. 1 minute recess.
Connecticut, Washington, D.C., New York, Hawaii. And that really concerns me because it's my understanding that this industry really plans ahead. Many of these travel agents plan these packages and sell these packages 6 months, 9 months out. And so if they are selling these packages, and we know that our Japan market is already down about 25 to 30%, these travel agents will now, if we have to increase this hotel occupancy tax, they'll have to eat that increase. They'll have to take that burden upon themselves. And so if I'm a travel agent from Japan, am I going to be pushing people towards Guam? Probably not. I would probably, encourage them to choose a cheaper destination, maybe somewhere in Southeast Asia, like Vietnam, or even Okinawa. It's closer to home for them. So I think this is really going to be very detrimental to our tourism industry. Many of the, jobs that we have here on Guam are directly related to tourism. And so, yes, there are many things that we need to fix. We need to make sure that our hotel industry as a whole, that our workers are paid for the incredible work that they do in making Guam, the best place to live, work, and visit. But doing something like this, I think, will be extremely detrimental to not just the hotel industry, but all of the ancillary services and industries that are affected by tourism. So there's no way I can support this increase. Sujos Masi.
Sujos Masi. Senator Siniclas, briefly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in light of the retiring speaker's comments, it just doesn't add up. How can you be concerned about this increase, but then the industry itself is raising its room rates by 47%? If the detriment was such a concern, I can understand if the market is showing us similar signals. If the hotels are lowering their rates or keeping them steady and having to go to reduced hours because they're struggling to attract, because these agents are just not going to come here, and then we're going to increase the tax, of course that wouldn't make any sense. But the reverse also doesn't make any sense. We can't say that raising this is going to harm the industry while the very industry is raising all of their prices. If the hotels are raising their prices, their room rates astronomically the way they have been, how can they come back and say that we can't do this because we can't compete if you do? And we just got to be upfront with our people and with the facts and with the policies that we're deliberating, not just in here, but of course with the very industry that's coming out and sending that very inconsistent mixed message. If you're trying to compete with some other destination on a basis of price, why are you only trying to compete from a tax basis while you're increasing all of your rates? So let's just put it all on the table. If that's the case, room rates should not be going up, but they have been. And in spite of them going up over these past 6 years, 47%, we're hitting record tourism numbers. So we can't go up 47% over 6 years and say that it's going to be, and then turn around and say that this increase is going to just shatter everything. Because the simple math, even the most basic math, does not add up that way. On that note, I would, like I said earlier, prefer that instead of raising a tax, we focus on pushing more benefit to our people, because really this tax is going to subsidize the employee costs, either through EITC payments or through subsidizing the hospital. I mean, that's basically, all of this is just component parts to a bigger budgetary problem. But we definitely shouldn't be shying away from these kind of things out of industry concerns if the very same industry is doing the exact opposite in a dramatically more expensive fashion.
Thank you. On the Speaker Cruz amendment, Speaker Cruz.
Just Just a point of information also, Madam Chair, to the previous speaker.
Please state your point of information.
Well, she did kind of bring up the fact that we would have the highest occupancy tax, hotel occupancy tax in the nation. However, we don't compete with those destinations. Basically, I believe the more proper comparison would be with other destinations that we do compete from. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker Cruz, you may close on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just the original amendment was to 15% to match CNMI. I don't know anything closer to Guam than CNMI, so I'll just leave it at that. But I'll just call the question. I'm not going to fight it any further.
On the amendment, on Speaker Cruz's amendment, we're going to vote. All in favor, please raise your hand on the Speaker Cruz amendment. Amendment passes. Thank you. Speaker? All right, back on the bill. Speaker Cruz, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, I have an amendment that's going out. It's only to make sure that the BPT amendment that we passed yesterday sunsets on October the 1st, next year. That the increase is only for 1 year. So that it matches this most recent one that just passed on the hotel occupancy, that it will only be for 1 year. It'll give all the new governor the chance to streamline and make tax policy as they see fit, since I've listened to all the ads of cutting taxes and streamlining government. So my amendment is just to sunset the BPT that we approved yesterday.
On the amendment, Senator Esteves, you are recognized.
I'm blown away, Madam Chair. You know, every time we do things like this, you know how much frustration and disruption we cause to the business community? With the last sunset provision, and I supported that, and I understood, because the tax cuts came quick, and we had already budgeted, and we were in the middle of the fiscal year. But the back and forth on sunset, no sunset, long term, no, not long term, this has an effect on businesses. You know, there's a lot of commentary, because obviously there's a lot of experts that, oh, you know, everyone raised their prices, and once the prices go up, they don't go down. You know how many businesses out there didn't raise their prices and ate the cost? But it goes beyond that. Because based on the sunset provision before, businesses entered into contracts at a certain price, with the expectation that the sunset provision was going to take effect. And so this constant leapfrogging back and forth, it's either, I don't think this is the time, Madam Chair, to put our toe in. We're either going to accept the 5% expense within the business community so they can make adjustments at long-term preparations, or not. But what's going to happen? We're going to extend the sunset again come 1 year? This is ridiculous. This is the reason why I didn't support the BPT increase in the beginning. not without significant cuts. But I don't think we should be dancing around the issue. So I'm hopeful that those that believe that this increase was necessary should follow through and keep it on the books. But this political dancing around the issue, well, you know, we increased it, but it's only temporary. This far out, we know darn well that all businesses are going to apply this to their prices. And it's going to sink deep into the community. So the sunset at this point is pointless. And I think it's really unfair to the businesses that did their part in the community, didn't raise their prices, locked into contracts based on the initial sunset provision that they were expecting on October 1st. At some point, there has to be some consistency, even if we don't agree. There has to be consistency moving forward. Those are the things that destabilize the economy. I don't know how I'm expected to vote on this. I didn't support the increase to begin with, not this early in the budget phase. But knowing now how this might affect businesses, this single amendment is going to have consequences in the economy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Speaker's amendment, Senator Ugan, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice Speaker. You know, I also find myself in a slight quandary, because whether it's increasing taxes for 1 day or 1 year or indefinitely, you know who's actually keeping this government operating? It's the good taxpayers, the individuals and the businesses that actually meet their obligations and pay their taxes on time. We shouldn't be penalizing them by saying we're going to take more of your hard-earned money from the taxpayers and say we're going to continue the operations of this government. Instead, Madam Speaker, we should be talking about imposing and collecting on penalties and interest rather than an amnesty. Yeah, we reflect on the $33 million that's going to be collected, but how much did this government, because these taxpayers did not meet their obligations on time, how much does this government have to forego because it did not take the initiative to aggressively pursue collection of those taxes? That's one question we have to ask ourselves. We should really be talking about suspending business licenses. If you don't pay your taxes on time, you should not have an opportunity to be able to continue to conduct business. We know of a business that recently was announced publicly that owes this government $14.7 million. And that's reflective of 3 calendar years of outstanding tax receivables from that one business. Madam Vice Speaker, that business had no reason to be operating if they were not meeting their tax obligations. And it applies across the board. You know, I had an older gentleman that came up to me about paying his real estate taxes. And he said that he approached an individual at Revenue Tax and asked if by any chance he could work out an arrangement. And you know, Madam Vice Speaker, that individual was instructed or asked or encouraged and urged to meet that obligation, even though it was a small amount, but this individual was asking for additional consideration. And this individual is not a business person, retired individual living on a fixed income. So if we're forcing good taxpayers to continue to run and operate this government, Madam Speaker, whether it's 1 day or 1 year, we should not be asking them to pay more. We should be going after collecting what is due and imposing the penalties and the interest, and taking it one step further and prosecuting these individuals so that we don't have to put the stress and the undue burden on all of these other individuals who are keeping this government in operation. So, Madam Speaker, I certainly, like I said a little earlier, have some concern about this because I don't think we should be imposing any additional taxes on our good-paying citizens out there who pay their taxes on time. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Madam Chair, I withdraw the amendment. Thank you. I believe that I was going to make some other amendments, but never mind. Let's just move forward this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Come forward with your cuts that you're going to be proposing. We'll go through them, and as you want, we'll start cutting, and then we'll see where we're at the end. Thank you. We're recessed until 2.